Father Provincial, Father Herb, my brother priests, fellow religious, dear friends. It's a great joy to be here 50 years later after the founding of this wonderful ministry by Cardinal Cushing, to be able to rededicate this sacred space and to be able to thank the Carmelite friars for the wonderful ministry that they have given here in this wonderful chapel and throughout our archdiocese. We're very, very grateful for their presence. When Pope Benedict made me a cardinal, he gave me a Carmelite Chapel in Rome as my church. It's much smaller than this one, actually. But there's a very famous statue of St. Teresa there, and it's run by the Carmelite friars, and I told them I wanted to take that statue back to Boston. I thought maybe we could put it here in the mall. And they told me Napoleon tried to get the statue. He didn't succeed, and I wasn't going to either. But you've done a wonderful job, and the chapel has come out just beautifully. We congratulate you and thank you. I often share with people my favorite story from the life of St. Francis, a certain conversation he once had with Brother Leo. And Francis says to Leo, "Leo, what was the special way in your life that allowed you to find God?" And at first Leo didn't want to answer, but St. Francis kept insisting, and so finally Leo said, "Well, if you have to know, by the grace of God, I was born lazy." My brothers and sisters were very ambitious, and they went out and made a lot of money and became very famous. But I used to like to go out in the fields, and I'd look at the birds and the animals, and at night I would go to the roof of my father's house and gaze at the planets and the stars. I'd ask myself, where did all of this beauty come from? And at first it was only curiosity, but then it became an overwhelming hunger to know the source of all goodness and beauty. And that's why I say, because I was born lazy, I discovered God. Well, the moral of the story isn't that slothfulness is going to help us in the spiritual life, but we need time and space for God to be able to discover His beauty and His love in our lives. In the United States in the last few decades, these malls have appeared in our suburbs. They are sort of the new secular temple, the holy city to our consumer society. I was reading in that Intellectual Journey TV guide once that in 1995, the typical supermarket had 5,000 items in it. Today, the typical supermarket will have over 50,000 items. You can buy 50 shades of lipstick, 30 different flavors of Crest toothpaste. We're always inventing new needs as our culture and society become more and more materialistic. But in the midst of this Mecca of Mammon, the Carmelite friars staff this sacred space, this Monte Carmelo, right here. In today's gospel, and throughout the Gospels, Jesus often talks to us about money. One scholar says, in the Scriptures, Jesus has more teachings about money than he does about prayer. And it's very interesting because so often material things become those false gods that prevent us from coming to know and serve the Lord the way that we should. Jesus at one place in the Gospel says that it's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And Chesterton said, ever since Jesus said that, zoologists have been trying to breed smaller camels. Always trying to adapt. In the story of the rich young man, we see how a young man is asking the right questions. What do I have to do to be happy? What do I have to do to be saved? And he's asking the right person. He's asking Jesus. Who better to give us the answer to those crucial questions? We know many people live their whole lives without ever formulating the important questions. But this young man had the questions. He went to Jesus, but he wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer. Jesus told him, you have to obey the commandments. Commandments are a roadmap for a good life, for God's plan. But the bad news was the commandments aren't enough. He told him he had to give away his money, give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. And the gospel says he went away sad. I often think that he went away sad because he failed to realize how much God loved him. The gospel says Jesus looked at the young man with love, but he didn't realize how much he was loved. Had he realized how much God loved him, I'm sure he would have given away all of his wealth very gladly and followed Jesus. Now, today's gospel are about people using all of their possessions to acquire a treasure. In the first instance, it's a buried treasure. And Jesus says, the one who finds the buried treasure out of joy goes and sells everything he has to be able to acquire that field with the buried treasure. Unlike the rich young man who went away sad, the one who finds that treasure is filled with joy and ready to sacrifice anything. The second part of the parable is about the pearl of great price. John Steinbeck wrote a book that found its inspiration in this parable. It's kind of a strange story about an Indian family in a village in Mexico on the coast, and they are divers for pearls, for oysters, to bring in the oysters. And they're very, very poor people, and they have a little baby who's sick, and they want to get money to take the baby to the doctor. And one day, they bring up this oyster that has a magnificent pearl, the best pearl ever found in those waters. And of course, they thought this was going to be the solution to all of their problems, to their poverty, to the medical needs of their child. But lo and behold, they became the object of the envy and the greed of everyone else in that town, and they had to flee. And at one point, trying to defend the pearl, their little baby is killed. And the Indian goes back to the sea, and he throws the pearl back into the ocean. The treasure that Jesus is talking about is, as he says, hidden. We must be seekers. It's not a material treasure. When I was bishop in the West Indies, I often met these people who were there looking for sunken treasure. They made all kinds of sacrifices. In one family, they had lost their son looking for these treasure ships, and they were still driven by their desire to find gold. We should be driven by our desire to find the real treasure. And to do that, we need to have time and space for God in our lives. Our culture is so addicted to noise and entertainment. We need time and silence and prayer to be able to recharge. And here in this wonderful chapel, we have that spiritual oasis.